No, this isn't an episode of Suits or the revamped version of one in LA or a legal court drama. Hi, this is Grayson Mann and David Hood with the Orange Crush podcast. Today, we are breaking down the news that just dropped shortly before we started recording. We have an article up on TigerNet breaking it down, but David and I wanted to get behind the microphone and talk some ACC lawsuits being settled, Clemson and Florida State, the ongoing battle. David and I were there last summer to view sort of the beginnings of it, in a sense, at the Clemson area. But David, it has been settled today. We just had an article posted that you written and illustrated really well. So break it down for our audience. What is happening today with the state of not only this conference, but sort of the dominoes that come with it?
Yeah, and been sitting on some of these numbers that I put in the article. And look, if I put numbers or stuff in there and I say I think, that means that I think you can kind of say that's what Clemson thinks too. Let me say that. Not pulling that number just out of thin air. Trust me, I wouldn't do that. Second of all, I want to make sure I wrote this in the article that everybody kind of understands that you can't look at this through the lens of Pete Thamel's article yesterday on ESPN, or the way that Florida State will frame this. Pete Thamel wrote a very good article on this yesterday. I knew it was coming. But you can tell that his sources are from the ACC, and it's going to make the ACC, look good. This is what it's all about. You can't look at it through the lens of Florida State because they came out like cavemen when all of this happened, swinging a big club, trying to knock people out, and had convinced their people that they would be gone by 2025 to the Big Ten or the SEC. As somebody told me earlier this morning, from Florida State, that's a lot of toothpaste to try and put back in the tube. And if you've ever tried that, you can't do it. Clemson stated intention, from the beginning, we need to find out what our rights are, because that grant of rights, that document had been locked away in the ACC archives under lock and key. People with machine guns can't get in to read it, can't take photos of it, but we need to know what are our options. It wasn't Clemson's stated intention to leave. They just simply wanted a bigger piece of the pie. They needed to know what their options were in regards to that ESPN contract. And, of course, the two big bugaboos, were the exit fee, which, if that were to happen today, around $165 million. And in other words, it's a third of the conference's operating budget yearly. So around $165 million. But added to that was this huge number that Florida State came up with, what are the media rights fees? Because if Clemson had left a year ago, it would be, the fact that they would not get to the rights to any of their broadcast games, football, baseball, basketball, whatever, through 2036. It would remain with the ACC, even if Clemson was in the Big Ten or the SEC. Big sticking point, because if you're not getting those media rights fees, you're not making any money. Clemson now has clarity on all of that. The exit fee, if they were to leave today, and they can leave today now, you just have to write a check for $165 million if you had an invite. Let me make that clear. Clemson is not leaving today. They don't have an invite, but they could leave today. And they would take their media rights fees with them. Right off the bat, boom. That would not stay with the Atlantic Coast Conference. So those are the big takeaways. Grayson, I told you, as you were helping me put the story together, we were going through some drafts since about 8 o'clock this morning preparing for this. As a fan, I told you, put yourself in the seat of a fan. What would your first question be about all of this that a fan, would kind of have?
Right. And as you're sort of reading this and you mentioned sort of lock and key, like throwing it away with guarded machine guns, I think of the Ark of the Covenant. Maybe it's right next to the contract is right there. But when I'm thinking at it in the lens of a Clemson fan, and especially as you laid out, they can leave anytime they want. Now they just have to sign the big contract and get an invite in the mail. But I think for me, it would be, as long as Clemson's staying in the ACC, how does the revenue sharing, how does the cut of the pie work now? Because Clemson is considered a bigger player in the ACC, keeping this conference. When you think ACC, you think Clemson in football, you think Duke and North Carolina in basketball, et cetera, et cetera. But now with Clemson in the college football playoff once again, or North Carolina, it's been rumored that they're going to have Bill Belichick and co. on Hard Knocks, which would get a lot of money on Max and a streaming revenue. How does that all play out? And Clemson coming to March Madness, Duke, big player in the NCAA tournament, going to probably be a 1 seed. and make a deep run, they're going to be on TV a lot. You're going to get Ian Eagle. You're going to get Kevin Harlan freaking out over broadcasts about them. How does that all get shaken out? And now it feels like it's a little more incentive-based. It's going to reward the success of those teams versus keeping it all even keel while you have maybe a Boston College team that's not going to make the NCAA tournament make the same as a Clemson team that's probably going to be a contender to make a Sweet 16 or an Elite 8 or potentially a Final Four. That's a podcast for another time. But David, sort of walk through this incentive structure and how it benefits the Tigers staying for now as maybe they're trying to figure out a new partner, or this almost revives that relationship with the ACC.
Well, let's start with this. Every school in the Atlantic Coast Conference will get a base media rights fee. Let's just say that that's $32 million. And then you have other incentives built into those. Do you make a March Madness appearance? Are you in the top 25 in both basketball and football? Do you make a bowl game? Those are called success brand initiatives. And then there are going to be rolling viewership numbers that you have to take a look at. And in talking to somebody up at the ACC, they were talking about, well, let's negotiate a point on whether it should be total viewers, per game or what are our top 5 contests. And Clemson is going, no, let's don't do it that way. Let's do it over total viewers, because let's say that NC State had one of the top 5 viewed games in football in 2024. Chances are pretty good it was against Clemson.
So you sort of have that, like, it clashes. It gets a little awkward in the room there where it's like, wait a second. They're not tuning in because of you. They're tuning in because of me.
That's right. They're tuning in because of Clemson. If Boston College had a great game, chances are it's because of Clemson, not because of Boston College. So Clemson wants, those total viewership numbers to be rolled out there. And, so now all of a sudden you're going, okay, so we got success brand initiatives. Do you make the bowl game? Are there payouts for that? Absolutely. You can kind of, now start seeing that Clemson's going to get a little bit bigger piece of the pie. And then, not to mention something that I wrote in the story, something that is not projected in Clemson's totals. My projections have Clemson going from around $44 million in fiscal year 25 to around $62, $63 million in fiscal year 26. That's a projection, right? Just kind of based off of historicals. Okay, so now you get up there to that $62 million, $63 million. If Clemson makes the college football playoff, that's an extra $4 million that the school gets, not to be shared with the conference. Okay, so both Clemson and SMU received $4 million from the college football playoff for their appearance last year. And then you get an additional $4 million for every round that you advance. So if you make it to the national championship game, that's an extra $20 million in revenue. There's a lot of incentives built in there. So Clemson could go 62, 63. If, they make the college football playoff national championship, now you're over 80 million. And you're not that far away. I tried to crunch, and excuse me while I go out of frame here. I tried to crunch some numbers in my dinosaur notebook.
Wow. Exclusive.
Okay, so I was looking for a notebook this morning, couldn't find my good one. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it and I go, man, so through 2031, if I'm going by, what the SEC has, and I tried to project it out, and I'm not great with calculators. Math was not my strong suit. But, Clemson could be in that plus 80 million range by 2031, whereas the SEC might be around 96 million. So you're closing the gap a little bit. Now, that all is, hey, are they going to renegotiate a deal? And over the next half decade, Clemson could make 466 million. 470 million, somewhere in there, while those SEC guys might be around 590. That's just my projections. Now, I will say that is not somebody telling me. That is my projection, just based off of what's in the notebook. So, Clemson closing the gap. That's the important part of it. And then there are other ways. Now, of course, that means, what do they have to do to keep making money?
They got to keep winning. They got to keep the good thing going. And also, I have to ask: did you like color in those calculations? Did you have like a yellow crayon or something and like a T-Rex calculator next to you? I gotta know. I gotta know. But yeah, in order to keep making the money, it sort of is it's how it really should be in my mind. You get rewarded for winning games. You get rewarded for being in the big spots, like this Duke game in early February. that's probably going to be a top 5 viewed game in college basketball this year. And now that's 2 ACC schools. Now there's a lot of factors of who's watching for what, but there was a
And
lot.
it's 75-25 football to basketball. So basketball obviously still a pretty big piece of this.
Mm-hmm. Is there this is sort of a question for me. And how does sort of the other sports get factored in this, like the baseballs of the world, the softballs? Like, how do we continue to trickle down? And does it not matter at all, or is it just a matter of?
Yeah, it really is just trickle down from there. But they really don't count, in the total viewership numbers, because they just simply don't add up. And by that, what I mean is, suppose that Clemson basketball is, you can track it on networks like the CW, you can track it on ESPN. But if you're on ESPN Plus or whatever, Clemson softball, I don't know how many viewers they're going to get, but it's almost not, it's not going to be a lot compared to, is it Clemson versus Syracuse? Because Syracuse fans are going to, in basketball, they're going to dial in. Clemson fans are going to dial in. Basketball, a little bit more of a pull, than baseball, softball, some of those others. But there will be trickle down, obviously, and the rev share is going to take care of that too. So, incentives. And I can remember a conversation that I had at Boston College. One of the coaches at Boston College, I was standing outside the Conti Forum waiting to pick up a football credential. And a coach that I know was walking into the Conti Forum, which is the basketball arena there at BC. And we walked in together, and he goes, "Not the same, is it?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "This place just doesn't invest in their facilities." He said, "If I bring a recruit to the football stadium, to Alumni Stadium, if I bring them to the Conti Forum, if I take them to other places on campus, Boston College hasn't invested in facilities. They don't want to. Yet they were getting the same amount of money as Clemson, who you walk around that athletic district and you take a look at Riggs Field and Little John Coliseum and Death Valley and the new tennis center and the new lacrosse center and the new gymnastics, facility and the wellness center. Clemson invests in athletics. Boston College doesn't, but was getting the same amount of money. And so, that's another part of it. And so now Boston College has an incentive to get better and to invest in their programs. They don't want to. They don't want to spend that money. Hey, Wake Forest, you're now on the clock. Because as I was looking at viewership and I kind of went through a list, of who do I consider to be the top. Thamel and I kind of disagreed a little bit on that.
I go back to the T-Rex thing. Oh, let's go.
We kind of go back to the T-Rex. Here's a list of what I think, would be, the top 5. I think these are the big winners in this. Clemson, Florida State, Miami, UNC, and Duke.
Okay.
UNC kind of, FSU pulls in that football dynamic like Clemson does, but Clemson's been good in basketball. Miami, you know what they are. UNC, basketball and football. Duke, because of basketball, obviously. I think there is another tier right below them with Louisville and Georgia Tech.
Where does SMU fall into that? Because I do think that they're sort of a sleeping, just with the NIL money they've been able to collect. I feel like they're probably going to rise. They're a quick riser on that list, I would assume, right?
Yeah, they're going to come up in that list. But I have to go on historical, so I don't have anything on SMU or Cal or Stanford yet because I don't have any historicals on that. But just kind of going back and looking, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia. And then I have a bottom 4 of Virginia Tech, Pitt, Wake, and Boston College. Hey, guys, you better get on it.
Yeah, it's really motivating. It reminds me of sort of the story that you were alluding to with some of the facilities. And this is something that the NFL does every year is they hand out public report cards of each organization and sort of grades, like it's an anonymous survey. They grade the facilities in the locker room. Be curious if that could be an added incentive where you're sort of it's publicly known that XYZ's program's locker room stinks or this place is awesome and sort of plays a factor in recruiting or sort of the incentive to get more money and be like, hey, we got to really invest in this. And the one thing that I think, David, to add to sort of loop back to thinking as a fan, I think you get clarity here. There's been a lot of confusion and a lot of questions about where this conference is heading. What's the direction? Where is Clemson going to be? It's sort of like you're renting out an apartment, but you're not sure if you're going to be moving in a couple months. And so now you add a little bit more to the lease. You sign on for another year. You feel a little bit more comfortable. You're not taking the moving boxes out of storage. you feel a little bit more secure in your space, knowing that you're going to be fairly compensated, and you have a little more clarity on the direction of the conference, which I don't think we really had last summer.
And I think everybody, kind of understands in this landscape that we have now, the next round of things that we see are going to be in that 2030, 31 timeframe, right? Now, what do I think is going to happen? Whew, good question. I would have told you 2 years ago, and so this is my disclaimer here, that I thought Clemson would have been in the SEC by 27 or 28. But that's just kind of the way where things stood then. So now with that disclaimer that you're allowed to be wrong and it changes daily, I think that the next thing that changes, I don't know that Clemson will go to the SEC or the Big Ten. I think that the next iteration of college football that we see will probably be Super League stuff, where the top teams break off, or at least that'll be the conversations. Maybe you do jump to an SEC for 2 years or 3 years or whatever while it gets worked out. I don't know, but I think that we all understand that's where it's headed. And it would be interesting to read further into this to see how that affects, this settlement. We'll find out. But for today, I consider this, from a Clemson perspective, it's a win. It is. Clemson gained the clarity that they needed. If an invite came from the SEC today, they now know what happens. They now know what it would cost them. $165 million. There you go. Write the check. Not that Clemson's going to write the check. I'm just saying it can happen. And the great thing is that Boston College could do the same thing. UNC could do the same thing. Duke could do the same thing. They're all kind of winners in this. And Clemson spent $5 million in legal fees. So your ROI, like I put in there, I said, hey, you're going to make that up by Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
pretty good ROI.
You really, and it's going to be fascinating for the next few months, where Clemson's going to be in the public spotlight, and maybe next July or this July, this summer when we go to the ACC kickoff, won't be as awkward between certain figures in the conference. Last year felt kind of like you were choosing tables at high school. Like, oh, they've been sort of bad-mouthing each other in English class. We really want to steer clear of those two.
Well, remember the pictures of Graham Neff and Jim Phillips and kind of the awkward, standing together at the ACC championship game, or maybe last year in Los Angeles on the court when Clemson was getting ready to play, Baylor. Maybe that will be a little less awkward now. Because Clemson is in a good spot. And look, are there still other considerations out there? Sure. The Big Ten and the SEC are trying to bully everybody into 4 teams, from their conferences getting an automatic, bid into the college football playoff. The ACC may be left with 2. Big deal, sure. But you walk through it and, you still have to feel like in the ACC, you're in a really good spot. So for Clemson, I consider today to be a win because now Now we all know. You know what it's going to cost. You know what it takes. You still have a great spot. You still have a historical spot in the ACC. And you're no longer in a litigious relationship with the boss.
Yeah, that's always nice, isn't it? Keeping things cordial outside in that front. So we'll see. Dave and I will be on handshake watch in the ACC tournament probably, which will be
I can't wait to talk to Graham Neff about all this. I really can't.
Oh, yeah. It should be a lot of fun. It'll be good. David, do we have any final lasting thoughts before we wrap up here? This legal analysis.
Yeah, so we had our courtroom drama. I do not get to see Graham Neff throttling Jim Phillips at the front of a courtroom, in some bet. No, I'm just kidding. But no, again, Clemson now knows. Florida State now knows. All the other schools, they now know. And Clemson got what they wanted out of it. Can't ask for a whole lot more than that.
No, you cannot. But what you can ask for is more episodes of the Orange Crush podcast. If you subscribe to TigerNet, I want to thank our good friends at Chick-fil-A for sponsoring this video. Herb Tyler, get yourself a chicken biscuit. Davidson is rolling into town this weekend. Why not grab some Chick-fil-A for your friends and be the king of your tailgate?
You know what always available.
That's right. That was planned. This was planned. It's very masterful. Guys, thank you as always for tuning in. Subscribe for more. God bless y'all. Have a good one.